Hello, my name is Christopher Scott from the Biblical Leadership blog at christopherscottblog.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about how you can keep your volunteers by placing volunteers where they are motivated and skilled. Okay, so I'm going to give you some ideas on how you can keep volunteers for your nonprofit organization, church, wherever you might work, and how you can keep those volunteers by placing them where they're motivated and skilled. So this is some of the material that I've taught through in a workshop I've done for the Center for Nonprofit Management in Dallas and Fort Worth, where we talk about how to recruit volunteers for a week, and then we talk about how to lead volunteers for a week, and then the final week of the workshop I talk with them about how to keep volunteers, and this is one of the ways that they can do that. And I like to introduce this topic by reading a quote and telling a story. I'm going to read a quote from Bill Hybels, who wrote the book The Volunteer Revolution, where he says, "Energy flows from passion, a God-given passion. An area of intense interest lies buried within each of us. One of the goals of volunteer experimentation is to discover that passion. Connecting our spiritual gift with an area of passion is the key to ultimate effectiveness and fulfillment in serving. It's also one of the keys to maintaining energy while serving. When you're serving an area of passion, nobody has to fire you up to stay motivated. You can't help but show up. It feels like recess. Then the bell rings and you get to go do your favorite thing." So that's a little quote about how we need to place volunteers where they're motivated and skilled, okay? And I like to also tell a story about my wife, who is a social worker. She has a master's degree in social work and has spent about 15 years in the social work field. And a while ago, she had offered to volunteer at a local homeless shelter, right? A gospel mission, they called it, but basically a homeless shelter. And she had contacted them and said, "Hey, I'm a social worker. I have a little bit extra time. I'd like to come volunteer and help where you need help and use some of my skills as a social worker to help." They said, "Okay, come sign up." So she came, she signed up. They said, "Come back on another day." She came back on that other day, and she goes to meet the person she's supposed to talk to about volunteering and actually start volunteering that day. And the person says, "Okay, you're here, you filled out your paperwork, you're a social worker. What we would like you to do is we have a waiting room of clients that come in that need services or they need help with things, and we put them in this waiting room while they're waiting for their appointments or waiting to be helped. We would like you to go into that waiting room and talk to the people, these clients." So my wife kind of is a little bit unsure of how her training as a social worker and her experience as someone who has done social work is supposed to help her serve people. So she's supposed to just go up to these people, talk to them, never met them before, they've never met her before, they don't know her and they don't care who she is, but she's supposed to go talk to them and help them out, which I think my wife lasted 2 days doing that. Naturally, she didn't want to go talk to people she didn't know and people that didn't want to talk to her, or that didn't, my wife didn't have the services they were looking for anyway, so there was no way for her really to help them. So anyways, it just didn't work out. So with that said, when you want to keep your best volunteers, you need to put volunteers where they're motivated and skilled. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So when we talk about motivations, this is where volunteers are passionate to serve. It has to do with their passions, their excitement, what they like to do, and what they want to volunteer to do. Research shows that volunteers who serve in roles that match their passion are more likely to continue volunteering. They're going to have more satisfaction from volunteering, and they get more enjoyment out of the volunteer experience. So that's something we want to put volunteers where they're motivated, where they're passionate to serve. However, those passions change sometimes over time. So at the beginning, volunteers volunteer because they want to make a difference in the community and they want to help a specific organization. But long-term, volunteers continue volunteering based on the connections they make with people, whether they're clients or staff or other volunteers. So that needs to change over time for you too. When you're trying to place volunteers where they're motivated and passionate, you need to put them at first up front. Put them where they're going to be interacting and making a difference in the organization and in the community. But over time, try to connect those volunteers with other staff or other volunteers in order to keep the relationship going. So that's some of the research I've found that shows that volunteers' motives change over time. And as a result, if you want to keep your best volunteers, you need to change how you motivate them along the way. So we talked about motivation, which is what volunteers are passionate about. The second area is skills, what they're good at, okay? So you need to find out what your volunteers are good at. Preferably, you want to find out what they're good at before they begin volunteering, right? And there's two basic ways you can do that: formal assessments or informal assessments, right? So formal assessments usually take place either through book surveys or online assessments that you can do. Those are the formal assessments. There's several Christian assessments. One is through the book called Network, written by Bill Hybels. Another one is called Discovering Your Gifts by Gene Wilkes. I believe it's an online resource now as well as a book. There's a book that I've used and that I recommend called Maximizing Your Effectiveness by Aubrey Malphurs that works very well. There's one other one, as far as, that's actually the three main ones that I recommend for religious ones. In addition, there's one that is based on the Myers-Briggs called Personality Type and Religious Leadership that I recently worked through. This one's pretty good too, by Roy Oswald and Otto Kroger. So those are some books that you can use for formal assessments in a Christian context. If you're in a secular context, there's some great resources you can use too. One is StrengthsFinder 2.0, is very popular. I was reading the USA Today a couple weeks ago, and this book it was still on the bestseller list, interestingly enough. It's been on there probably for 3 years now, I think. It's still a bestseller, still used by a lot of companies out there. Some of the other secular assessments that you can use via books are Now Discover Your Strengths by Marcus Buckingham, StrengthsFinder 2.0 that I mentioned, Strengths-Based Leadership by Tom Rath, and then there's the Workuno Strengths Test. I haven't heard as many people using that anymore. I think it's kind of a spin-off from the StrengthsFinder 2.0. It's someone who kind of took that material and put it online from what I understand. And then there's the Multiple Intelligencies Test for Adult Literacy and Education. It's a little different, a little bit more geared toward knowledge and how you learn, not necessarily your strengths and what you can do in an organization. So those are some formal assessments, right? And you don't always have to do something like this formally, okay? You can do it a little bit informally, whether you just want to find out someone's DISC personality or Myers-Briggs. That's another way to kind of informally do it on your own, is to have someone take those one of those two personality tests, and then you can kind of get a feel for what they might be good at. If they're introverted, put them alone working by themselves. If they're extroverted, make sure they're getting to work with other volunteers. Basic stuffs like that. There's also a way that you can find out volunteers' strengths and skills based on just talking to them and asking them, right? So I have some questions that I've written up that suggest, they provide you for suggestions about how you can get to know your volunteers before they start volunteering, and then plug them in places where they're skilled, right? So there's passion identifiers. These are a series of questions you can ask volunteers that helps identify the passions that they have. So passion identifiers. What are you good at? What do people say you're good at? What energizes you? What comes naturally and effortlessly to you? And what do you do when you have free time? You can just ask one of those 5 questions, a couple of those 5 questions, and it'll give you a pretty good feel for what the volunteer is passionate about and what they like to do. Some passion stoppers, right? So this will tell you what volunteers are not passionate about and are not going to be good at, okay? Passion stoppers. You can just simply ask volunteers, what aren't you good at? What tasks do you wish someone else could do for you? So what tasks do you do that you wish someone else could do for you? What drains your energy? What is the last thing you do when you have free time, right? When you have free time, what's the last thing you want to do? And again, it's good to remember, as we've talked about motivations, you want to place volunteers where they're passionate to serve, and then skills, you want to place volunteers where they have strengths and skills to do the work that you need. However, that pendulum can always swing too far as trying to place volunteers where they're needed. At the end of the day, the trash still needs to get taken out, the newsletters still need to get put in the mail, things like that. Sometimes you just got to roll up your sleeves and put someone to work doing the work that doesn't always want to do the work. So I do understand that as I'm going through this video and teaching. But ideally, you want to put volunteers where they are motivated to serve and skilled to serve as well, if you want to keep your best volunteers long term. My name is Christopher Scott from the Biblical Leadership blog. If you want to learn more about leading volunteers, you can visit my blog at christopherscottblog.com. As well, I'll try to put some of the links for these books that I recommended down below this YouTube video, so you can go check out those books if you want to purchase them. So again, thanks for tuning in. I hope to get to share with you some more about how to find, lead, and keep volunteers in some of my other videos. Thanks again, and I hope you have a great day.